Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, December 29th, 2019. This is the last show of the year, and we are live tonight. We have a very, very exciting show for you going on. It's been a very, very busy past few days. I have been at the Kwanzaa events at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. Some of you all came out to the Kwanzaa event starting Thursday, December 26th. I was the keynote speaker for the Kwanzaa celebration on Friday, December 27th at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. I met a lot of my listeners, met a lot of people who watch my videos on Facebook Live, watch me on YouTube. Met one brother from Canada. I think he lives in Windsor, and he watches my stuff on the internet. He watches my broadcast on Facebook Live. So it's been a very, very busy past few days, and I was at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History today as well for the fourth day of Kwanzaa Ujamaa, which is cooperative economics. Then I went over very quickly. So that was 3 p.m. to, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. today. Then I was scheduled to speak over at St. Francis Baptist Church at 7021 West Warren, Detroit. Their Kwanzaa event was 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. So I was scheduled to speak at 6 p.m. So I went over there and did my presentation dealing with Kwanzaa reconnects African Americans to African culture, and dealt with also the year of return. And then I rushed out here to the radio station to get ready to do this show. So it's been a very, very busy day. Then I'm back at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History for the Kwanzaa events. Monday, December 30th. It's going to be 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. That event is organized by the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association. Special guest is going to be Dr. Umar Johnson. He's going to be speaking tomorrow. These are all free and open to the public. It should be, I mean, every day. Now, the turnout has been good. Today was a little lighter because it's Sunday, but, you know, as far as I'm concerned, there's approximately, 668,000 people in Detroit. Detroit is 80% African American. As far as I'm concerned, there should be a line out the door, down the street, down by the Fox Theater, as if Beyonce and Cardi B and Nicki Minaj were performing on stage for free, and Lizzo is opening up for them. That's just how I look at it, okay? So, the Monday, December 30th, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Tuesday, December 31st, New Year's Eve, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. for Kuumba, which means creativity. And that's Nanu Jiapo. They are that African dance and drumming group. They're the ones sponsoring and organizing the 6th day of Kwanzaa. The 7th day of Kwanzaa, the last day of Kwanzaa, Imani, which means faith. New Year's Day, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. organized by Hood Research. That's Theo Broughton and Hood Research. So come on out. Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History in Detroit, 315 East Warren Avenue. Each day is free. There's an African marketplace each day. I have a vendor table. Come support the African History Network. That helps finance the research that I do, helps finance this show, etc. Okay? So on tonight's show, we're going to talk some about Kwanzaa. And I'm going to share with you an extensive article that I wrote, Kwanzaa Reconnects African Americans to African Culture for Self-Empowerment. So we'll talk some about that. Then also, I want to deal with, in Harlem, New York, okay, at the Black Arts Theater, this past week, they had a event there to honor the legacies of Dr. Yosef, ben-Jochannan, Dr. Henrik Clarke, Dr. Chancellor Williams, and Dr. Cheik Anta Diop, okay, and present there at the event were two of my teachers. Opening discussion was Opening this discussion, they had Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who you've heard on this show before and on this radio station. He's one of my teachers, as well as Professor James Small, okay? And also Dr. Jeffries' wife, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, was there as well. They opened this ceremony, okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened. Amsterdam News has a good article dealing with that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened there. And then also this past week, last week, there was an article I did not get a chance to get to the past couple of weeks. We dealt with the unemployment rate, right? And we dealt with the low unemployment rate. I think it's 3.5%, something like that. But that doesn't tell the full story, okay? And News1.com had a really good article that I talked about briefly last week. And this deals with the African American unemployment rate. Low unemployment rate contradicts the truth. No good jobs and low wages. The African American unemployment rate may be among its lowest ever, but what kind of jobs are really hiring? The latest jobs report is a sobering look at the truth. So we're going to talk about this. We know that the country's unemployment rate 3.2%, the African American unemployment rate 5.5%. But as I talked about last week, about 44% of the jobs that Americans have are low-wage paying jobs. Median annual wage $18,000 a year. Okay, so we're going to talk about that as well. And then this date in African American history, on December 28th, 1956. December 28th, 1956. This was after the Montgomery Bus Boycott ended. You had a pregnant African-American woman who was shot on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, because you had white supremacists who were attacking African-Americans after the bus boycott ended because they did not want to end segregation. Okay? So, you know, En Vogue had the song, Give It Up, Turn It Loose. So the segregationists didn't want to give it up and turn it loose. We're going to talk about that as well because that oftentimes is not talked about. We'll talk about the Montgomery Bus Boycott, and unfortunately a lot of people don't really understand the Montgomery Bus Boycott and don't understand what actually ended segregation on the buses in Montgomery, Alabama. But then we don't talk about the retaliation after the bus boycott ended. And we know that Rosa Parks was basically ran out of Montgomery, Alabama. After the bus boycott ended, she was still getting death threats. She leaves Montgomery, Alabama, comes to Detroit, and gets she's offered a job in John Conyers' office, Representative John Conyers. Okay, so we're going to deal with that, and we'll give a little update on impeachment dealing with Trump as well. And as I told you before, I predicted in January of 2017, I told you Donald John Trump was going to be impeached. I told you it was going to happen. All right, so on the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events in history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can sign up for the email newsletter there. We have a weekend promotion going on. Get 40% off orders $100 or more. And you can support the African History Network there. And you can also donate to the African History Network. PayPal.me/TheAHNShow. PayPal.me/TheAHNShow. Okay, so that helps support the African History Network. It helps us to keep doing what we do, stay on the air, pay the bills, etc. Let's see. Okay, so I'll be at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History the rest of this week, Monday through Wednesday. Channel 4 News was there, WDIV. They interviewed me today. It aired on the 6 p.m. news. I didn't see it. I've been out all day. It's been hectic. As soon as I go home, I'm going to bed. That's all I know. So if you're on Facebook and they put it on Facebook, share the video on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network, and my personal page, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. I'm scanning. Click on Detroit.com. Click on Detroit.com, which is WDIV Channel 4 here in Detroit. And I'm trying to see if I see it. If we get it, maybe I'll share it with you here. Okay. And I'm looking for their search option. here as well. All right, so let's jump into this dealing with Kwanzaa before the break. You know, I've been doing Kwanzaa presentations. Let's see, I think this is my 5th year speaking for Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. They host the 2nd day of Kwanzaa at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. So I know this is my 5th year speaking for them. I think this is my 7th year in all doing presentations dealing with Kwanzaa. And in my presentations that I do dealing with Kwanzaa, I deal a lot with the African roots of Kwanzaa, because oftentimes it's not talked about. The traditional African first fruit harvest festivals that Kwanzaa is based upon. Because oftentimes people say things and they say, oh, well, Kwanzaa is a made-up holiday, things like this, right? Well, all the holidays are made-up holidays. Okay, now, let me just say this from the beginning. I may say some things that are outside the circumference of your own awareness. Just because you never heard them before, disagree with them, or don't like them does not mean that they are not true. It just means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about. All right? So, all the holidays are made-up holidays when you deal with Christmas, Thanksgiving, Cinco de Mayo, 4th of July, as Dr. Ishaka Musa Barashango called it, the 4th of July, but we call it the 4th of July. Whether you talk about Valentine's Day, all of them. Okay, Columbus Day, you know, these are commemorations that are Easter, okay, Easter, Oyster, Ishtar. These are all holidays that are commemorating some type of occurrence, whether it's dealing with astronomy, like the winter solstice, which occurs usually December 20th, December 21st, December 22nd, okay, which is why Christmas is celebrated on December 25th, because December 25th marks the birth of the rebirth of the sun each year. On December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree northward after moving into its lowest position and going into what's called the winter solstice. And it enters into the sign of Capricorn. And on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree northward, and December 25th marks an increase in sunlight. Each subsequent day marks an increase in sunlight. Okay, so in ancient times, December 25th was looked at, or what would be the equivalent of December 25th, because they weren't using the Gregorian calendar, which is introduced by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582 AD. But they're equivalent to December 25th. So when we look at the other, what we call, this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness, crucified saviors, whether we talk about Mithra, whether we talk about Saturnalia, the festival of Saturnalia celebrated amongst the Romans, whether we talk about Mithra celebrated amongst the Persians, or any of these other, like when we read Christianity Before Christ by Dr. John G. Jackson, we see that these different deities, their celebrations are on or around December 25th. That's not by accident, okay? So all of these holidays are made-up holidays, okay? Doesn't mean you shouldn't celebrate them, but if you're going to celebrate European holidays, you should at least know what you're celebrating. So I encourage people to read African People and European Holidays of Mental Genocide by Dr. Ishaka Musa Barashango. Okay, book 1 and book 2, because he goes deep into the origins of these various holidays we've been taught to celebrate. But the various African first fruit harvest festivals that Kwanzaa is based upon, okay, are much older than a lot of these holidays we've been taught to celebrate. Okay, so I don't beat up on people who celebrate these various holidays, but you should at least know the history of what it is that you are celebrating. All right, now, in 2017, you know, there was a good article dealing with Kwanzaa from NBCnews.com, because in 2017, because of the election through the Electoral College of Donald John Trump, and many of us still don't understand the Electoral College, created by the U.S. Constitution. I think that's Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Kwanzaa had a different meaning. Kwanzaa had a new meaning, had more purpose. So in 2017, Kwanzaa had a more important meaning for African Americans in the era of Donald John Trump, who I told you was going to be impeached, because of the adversities and racial strife that happened in 2017 to 2019 and will probably continue in 2020. This is why he must be voted out of office, along with his buddy Moscow Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, who's up for re-election in 2020. So this was discussed in an article from NBCnews.com written by Sherry Williams entitled "Under Tense Political Climate, Kwanzaa Holds Special Meaning." Under tense political climate, Kwanzaa holds special meaning. And the subject of this article was a 30-year-old African-American woman named Imani Patterson. Okay, and Imani means faith in Kiswahili. And she grew up celebrating Kwanzaa with her family, but in college she did not observe it much on her own. However, in 2016, because of the election of Donald John Trump and after the birth of her daughter, she thought it was important to reconnect with the holiday that celebrates black culture, African American culture. Okay, so we're going to continue this on the other side of the break. I'm going to let you hear what she had to say. You listen to 910 AM Superstation and Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep, the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, December 29th, 2019. We are live, last show of the year. You know, April of 2020 will mark my 10th year in radio. And, March of 2020 will mark my 10th year in radio. April of 2020 will mark my 4th year doing the African History Network show on 910 AM Superstation. Okay? All right, so right before the break, we were talking about Kwanzaa and some of the origins of Kwanzaa. I've been at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History the past 4 days for the Kwanzaa celebrations. I was a keynote speaker there Friday for the second day of Kwanzaa Kuji Chagalia, which means self-determination. So right before the break, I was sharing with you an article that I wrote back in 2015, and I updated it. I updated each year. Just updated it a few days ago. And this is entitled "Kwanzaa Reconnects African Americans to African Culture for Self-Empowerment." You can read all of my articles that I write at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Right on the homepage, click on the link that says read articles. Okay. All right, so NBCNews.com had an article in 2017 entitled "Under Tense Political Climate, Kwanzaa Holds Special Meaning." Okay, and the subject of the article was a 30-year-old African-American woman named Imani Patterson. Okay, and Imani Patterson grew up celebrating Kwanzaa with her family, but in college she did not observe it. But after the election of Donald John Trump and the birth of her daughter, she decided to celebrate it again. Okay, and she thought that it was important to reconnect with the holiday that celebrates African American culture and African culture. She said, quote, "After he was elected, it was disheartening. I cried real tears. I held my daughter close because I felt that we reverted back to the old ways." That's what Make America Great Again is talking about, going back to a time before civil rights, things like this. They want to go back to Ain't B and Opie and Mayberry, things like this. And when you watch Andy Griffith, notice there are no black people on Andy Griffith, right? They had one with a speaking role, and he was Opie's football coach. Okay, I'm not kidding. Go watch Andy Griffith. I like Andy Griffith because I watch MSNBC all day, right? So when I get tired of watching MSNBC and watching the antics of Trump and him getting away with stuff, you know, that we know President Barack Obama couldn't get away with 1/20th of what Trump is getting away with, and Republicans are just turning a blind eye. But, you know, when I want to go watch something and I don't have to worry about any black people getting killed, I go watch Andy Griffith. Because there's no black people in Andy Griffith, so you don't have to worry about any of them getting killed, right? All right, so TV land, right? All right, so Imani Patterson lives in Frederick, Maryland. All right, now she said, quote, "The whole adage, make America great again, is white supremacy at its best again." That's when I was like, you know what, Kwanzaa is important to me because that's something that we established as African Americans. That's something that we should celebrate and encompass in our daily lives, not just the 7 days, but 365 days a year. And she's correct. So the reason why Kwanzaa is from December 26th through January the 1st, the reason why it continues into the new year is so we take these principles with us into the new year and practice them 365 days a year. The goal is not to be super black for 7 days and to go back to your old ways the rest of the year. is to take these principles, the 7 principles of the Nguzo Saba, which I'll break down, take these into the new year and practice them in the new year, okay? So this continues into January for Dr. King Day, continues into February for African American History Month, continues into March, April, all of this, right? Okay, so Kwanzaa is an African American and Pan-African cultural holiday. It's not a religious holiday, it's a cultural holiday which celebrates family, community, and culture. That's the focus, family, community, and culture. It's celebrated from December 26th to January the 1st. The name Kwanzaa comes from the Kiswahili phrase Matunda ya Kwanzaa. So you may hear or see it referred to as Swahili, but it's actually Kiswahili, which is a Bantu language, and I'll get to that in just a minute. And so Kwanzaa comes from the Kiswahili phrase Matunda ya Kwanzaa, which means first fruits. So the origins of Kwanzaa are in the first fruit harvest celebrations of Africa, from which it takes its name. Now, Kiswahili, also called Swahili, is a Pan-African language, which is the most widely spoken African language. Kwanzaa is celebrated by as many as approximately 20 million people around the world. TheGriot.com had an article from 2009, 5 things you didn't know about Kwanzaa but should. FaceToFaceAfrica.com just had an article the past few days about Kwanzaa as well. Okay, so you can check out FaceToFaceAfrica.com. The word face, the number 2, FaceAfrica.com. So Kiswahili is a Pan-African language, which is the most widely spoken African language on the continent of Africa, and is spoken by at least 50 million people. There are an estimated 900 to 1,500 different languages spoken in Africa. And you can, for one quick resource you could look at for that is from Britannica.com. Okay, Britannica.com, official website of Encyclopedia Britannica. But there are many distinct political units share a common or similar language. Okay. All right, now let's continue here. So when we look at the African origins of Kwanzaa, first fruit celebrations have taken place in African history going back to ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt and Nubia, what the Greeks called Nubia, or Ta-Nehesi. You also see referred to as Ta-Seti. We also see first fruit festivals celebrated amongst the Ashanti of Ghana and the Yoruba of Nigeria. We can also find first fruit celebrations in large African empires like among the Zulu or Amazulu of South Africa, and smaller societies in southeastern Africa like the Matabele, the Thonga, and Lebedu. Now, in ancient Kemet, the festival was called Pert en Men, M-I-N, Pert en Men, or the coming forth of men. Among the Zulu, it was called Umkosi. There was an article I read last year that talked about Umkosi, because Umkosi is celebrated, historically was celebrated around the same time of the year that we celebrate Kwanzaa. Okay, so these are traditional African first fruit harvest festivals that we celebrated in Africa. So you have Umkosi amongst the Zulu, amongst the Swazi, it was called Inkwala. Among the Matabele, it was Inkswala. Among the Ashanti, it had various names as well. We see it amongst the Yoruba also. The Ashanti and Yoruba festivals are usually referred to as the New Yam Festival, which is the time of harvesting the first yams. Even though these festivals have various names and are from different African societies or nations, they all focused around the harvesting of the first fruits and have similar values and practices. For more information, you can read Dr. Maulana Karenga's book, The African American Holiday of Kwanzaa, a celebration of family, community, and culture. Read pages 16 to 17, which really deals with the African origins of Kwanzaa, but it's an excellent book. Okay, now, one of the myths about Kwanzaa is that is spread by many African Americans who have not done their research, is that Kwanzaa is a made-up holiday, as I said. They apparently have not studied the history of Christmas, because now this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness, but nowhere in the biblical text does it state that Jesus the Christ was born on December 25th. Okay? There's nowhere in the biblical text. All right? And then also the word Christmas comes about in 11th century AD, right around 1052 AD, coming from Christus Mass, meaning the Mass of Christ. Okay, so when you study the origins of these words and you study the origins of these celebrations, okay, it's much different than what we've been told, or much different than what is much different than how we thought it came into existence. Let me put it like that. Okay, so all of the European holidays that African Americans have been taught to celebrate are made-up holidays, and some of them have their origins in what we call pagan celebrations, like the Festival of Saturnalia, the Roman Festival of Saturnalia, which is practiced amongst the Romans. Okay, and Saturnalia is in reference to the deity Saturn. Okay, and the Festival of Mithra, okay, which as well amongst the Persians. Okay, so the cultural celebrations that Kwanzaa is based upon are older than the European holidays that African Americans have been taught to celebrate. Many of these holidays we've been taught to celebrate. So what is Pan-Africanism? Okay, so to better understand Kwanzaa, we also have to understand the ideology of Pan-Africanism. So Pan-Africanism is an ideology that African people around the world and throughout the diaspora, the force spreading out of African people into the Americas, even though we were here going back tens of thousands of years. We know that from reading Dr. David Imhotep's book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. But throughout the diaspora, that African people should be united. It deals with, so Pan-Africanism deals with the social, cultural, political, economic, material, and spiritual aspects. Pan-Africanism teaches that the fate of African people worldwide is intertwined, and we share not only a common history but a common destiny. Not only a common history but a common destiny. Our future as African people is interconnected and intertwined. Okay, it doesn't matter who your colonizer was or who your colonizer is. Okay, it doesn't matter what language you speak, because oftentimes we adopt the language of the colonizer. So here, most African Americans speak English because we were colonized by the English. Okay, when we go to Kenya, you have African people in Kenya who speak English because they were colonized by the British, the English, British, right? When we look at other African countries, they oftentimes adopt the language of their oppressor, whether it's they speak French or whatever it is. Okay, all right, now. If you read Pan-Africanism for Beginners by Sid Lemelle, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, Lemelle, Pan-Africanism for Beginners, pages 11 through 13. It's a really, really good book to give you a good basic understanding, basic foundation in understanding Pan-Africanism. Okay, but it doesn't matter where you are throughout the world. Okay, understanding Pan-Africanism understands that African people have to be united. Yes, we're going to have differences. Yes, we'll practice different religions, etc. Yes, we'll have various different cultures, but that we do see various cultural themes, various similar or the same cultural themes, a cultural unity throughout African cultures, even though we'll see differences also. Now, some proponents of Pan-Africanism throughout history have been Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Edward Blyden, Prince Hall, the Prince Hall Masons, Paul Cuffey, David Walker, Henry Highland Garnett, Timothy Thomas Fortune, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, Alexander Crummell, Bishop Alexander Walters, Dr. W.B. Du Bois, just to name a few. There's so many. So when we look at the creation of Kwanzaa, when was Kwanzaa created? So Kwanzaa was created in 1966 by Dr. Maulana Karenga, and members of the organization US, in the midst of the Black Freedom Movement. Okay, so I consulted with one of my teachers on this. This is one source, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who confirmed to me that members of organization US also helped to create Kwanzaa, and also on organization US website, it says on there that members of organization US as well helped to create Kwanzaa also. So I checked numerous sources, and I have conversed. There was one brother, I forgot his name. I talked to him last year through Facebook. One of my frat brothers, who's a journalist, Deshaun Farad, put me in touch with one of the brothers of Organization US, who's a co-founder of Kwanzaa as well. So we give honor and respect to them also. All right. Okay, so So Dr. Karenga is a professor and chair of the Department of Studies at the Department of Africana Studies at California State University, Long Beach. And let's see, when we look at 5 fundamental activities of traditional African first fruit festivals, many people are familiar with the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, known as the Nguzo Saba, but most African Americans are not aware of the 5 fundamental activities of continental African first fruit celebrations. They include ingathering, commemoration, celebration, recommitment, and reverence. Ingathering, commemoration, celebration, recommitment, and reverence. These are the 5 fundamental activities of traditional African first fruit festivals that we will see take place regardless of, in general, regardless of which culture that you look at. And this is incorporated into Kwanzaa as well. So ingathering is a time of coming together or ingathering among the people to reaffirm the bonds between them. Commemoration, a time of commemoration of the past in pursuit of its lessons and in honor of its models of human excellence, our ancestors. Celebration, a time of celebration of the good of life and of existence itself, the good of family, community, and culture, because that's the central focus of Kwanzaa, family, community, and culture. The good of the awareness and the ordinary, and a word, the good of the divine, natural, and social. Recommitment, a time of recommitment to our highest cultural ideas in our ongoing effort to always bring forth the best of African culture, the best of African cultural thought and practice. And reverence, a special time for the Creator and creation in thanks and respect for the blessings, bountifulness, and beauty of creation. Okay, so whatever name you may call the Creator, Creatress force, Amen, Amen Ra, Olodumare, God, Jesus, Yeshua, Allah. Contrary to popular belief, Kwanzaa, you have some people say Kwanzaa does not honor the Creator or Creatress, okay? And you say Kwanzaa, so you have some people that say Kwanzaa lacks spirituality. Kwanzaa doesn't reference God, things like this. Now, Kwanzaa is a cultural celebration. It's not a religious celebration. But in all traditional African celebrations of things like this, spirituality, the Creator is involved in that. At most Kwanzaa celebrations, we pour libations to the ancestors. We welcome the spirits of the ancestors in. So Kwanzaa does honor the Creator, Creatress force, but it does not prescribe to a certain religion. For all practical purposes, African people traditionally had spiritual systems as opposed to religions. One basic way to understand this, and this is something that Dr. Ray Hagins of the African Village teaches, one of my teachers. One basic way to understand this is that spirituality teaches you how to think, whereas religion tells you what to think. We also have to keep in mind that African people introduced God consciousness and spirituality to the world. The first concept of a supreme being, deity, or quote-unquote God came from African people. Now, when we look at the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, known as the Nguzo Saba, one of the reasons why Kwanzaa was created was to introduce and reinforce the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles of Kwanzaa. All right. First, we have umoja, which means unity, to strive for and maintain unity in the family, community, nation, and race. Second, in each day of Kwanzaa, you celebrate one of these different principles. Now, some Kwanzaa celebrations you go to, they may incorporate a presentation, African dance, things like this. They may reference and incorporate different aspects of the other principles of Kwanzaa on various days. Okay, but in general, you celebrate a different principle each one of the 7 days. So the second day is Kujichagulia, self-determination, to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves. You know, Dr. Wade Nobles taught us that power is the ability to define and shape reality and have other people accept your definition of reality as if it were their own. The third principle of Kwanzaa that we commemorate and celebrate on the 3rd day is Ujima, collective work and responsibility. Okay, to build and maintain our community together and make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems and to solve them together. Okay, so many of us first heard about the term Ujima before we started practicing Kwanzaa. All right, we heard it on the TV show Sanford and Son. Okay, so in episode entitled Lamont Goes African, that was season 2, episode 17, Lamont said, we're going to get some Ujima in this house. And Fred asked Bubba, he said, Bubba, you ever heard of Ujima? He said, and Bubba said, no, I haven't heard of Ujima, but I know Big Jima. Okay, so we see this reference in Sanford and Son, but a lot of people don't make the connection. Okay, that's just something I do. I connect. Because I study the history of TV shows, I connect things in TV shows to history. So there was an episode where Lamont was taking an acting class, and he was rehearsing Othello with his white female teacher. And they were in his living room, and he's practicing the scene where Othello chokes Desdemona. And so he's pretending to choke her, and Fred walks in and sees Lamont choking this white woman to death, and Fred almost has a heart attack. All right, so but then Lamont explains to Fred that Othello is a Moor. So on the TV show Sanford and Son, he references the Moors, Moor. All right, there's another episode where Fred traces his roots, and like Alex Haley, right? So he traces his roots, and he finds out he's Jewish, and they refer to Jesus as Yeshua, because the letter J didn't exist until 1630 AD. And when you look up the word Jesus in the dictionary, it takes you back to the Hebrew or Amharic Yeshua, Y-E-S-H-U-A. Y-E-S-H-U-A is one spelling of it, but it's with a Y, not a J, because the letter J didn't exist back then. Right? So one of the mistakes that we make is we think oftentimes the way things are today is the way they've always been, and that's not true. So this is why you have to understand the etymology of words as well and study language. So that's the third principle, Ujima. Fourth principle, Ujima. Cooperative economics, to build and maintain our own stores, shops, and other businesses, and to profit from them together. Fifth principle, Nia, which means purpose, to make our collective vocation the building and developing of our community in order to restore our people to their traditional greatness. Sixth principle, Kaumba, creativity, which means to do always as much as we can in the way we can in order to leave our community more beautiful and beneficial than we inherited it. And the seventh and final principle, which we celebrate on January 1st, so we take these principles into the new year and practice them year round, as opposed to being super black for 7 days and going back to being a Negro the rest of the year, is Imani, which means faith. To believe with all of our heart in our people, our parents, our teachers, our leaders, and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. And I say the leaders that deserve it, because some of them don't, but you know, this is keeping it real, okay? Some of them need to be voted out of office. All right, unless you are referring to leaders as being non-elected officials, which could be understandable as well. All right, so some people asked the question, well, is Kwanzaa a black Christmas? No, Kwanzaa is not a black Christmas, contrary to popular belief. You can celebrate Kwanzaa and Christmas if you choose to do so, or you may just celebrate Kwanzaa, okay? And the greeting for Kwanzaa is Abaragani, which means what's the news in Kiswahili. And the response to Abaragani would be whichever principle of the day of Kwanzaa is being celebrated. So for the fifth principle of Kwanzaa, it would be Nia, which is purpose. Okay, so you can read more. Check out the article that I wrote. Kwanzaa reconnects African Americans to African culture for self-empowerment. That's at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, visit the official website for Kwanzaa, and I'll give that link to you also because I have that here as well. Pull that up, because I'm on that website each year. OfficialKwanzaaWebsite.org. OfficialKwanzaaWebsite.org. Okay, to give you some more background information. But that's just some good information, and this relates to African history and culture as well. Now, when I talked about Bantu languages, Bantu is a group of 500 African languages. Spoken, we see Bantu languages spoken in Kenya, eastward in Kenya. We see them going all the way to Cameroon, okay, towards central West Africa. Cameroon. And 12 Bantu languages are spoken by more than 5 million people, including Rundi, Rwanda, Shona, Xhosa or Isixhosa, Zulu or Amazulu, and Swahili or Kiswahili. And we see that when we look at Isixhosa, Isixhosa is the language spoken in the film Black Panther. So Isixhosa is a Bantu language. Kiswahili is a Bantu language. We know that Wakanda is a real word. Okay, Wakanda is a Bantu word, but we see the word Wakanda also in Native American languages like the Omaha Ponca language and the Sioux Indian language. Wakanda is an ancient word. Okay, Wakanda means possesses secret powers. And in the Kikongo language, Kanda means family, K-A-N-D-A. Kanda means family in the Kikongo language. There is a water park in Wisconsin called Wakanda. Now you're going to see various spellings. There's a few variations of the spelling of Wakanda. You may see it W-A-K-O-N-D-A. You may see it W-A-K-A-N-D-A. Okay, but we see Wakanda in different languages. All right, and in the Wisconsin water park is spelled W-A-K-A-N-D-A if I remember correctly. And I went online to their website, and they have historical markers there, and they talk about the early Indian mound builders. And if you read The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep, we know that the early Indian mound builders were African people, the Khoisan, okay, who come from southern Africa and are the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. All right, so all of this history is interconnected, interrelated. All of this history is connected, okay? Calling number 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. So come out to the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, or in whatever city you are. If you're out of state, we know that Kwanzaa celebrations all across the country. Celebrate these, make contacts with people, experience new businesses. You may find out, we know different community groups and organizations and community centers have Kwanzaa celebrations. So you may find out about organizations, you may find out about community centers that you didn't even know existed. They're in your community that you didn't even know existed. Okay? Okay, so let me go to this next story here. The Black Arts Theater this past week honored the legacies of 4 of our great Grandmaster Scholar warriors, okay? Dr. John Henrik Clarke, Dr. Yosef ben-Jochannan, Dr. Cheik Anta Diop, and Dr. Chancellor Williams. Dr. Chancellor Williams wrote The Destruction of Black Civilization. So the legacies of several progressive activists turned scholars were recognized Tuesday evening, December 24, 2019, at Harlem's National Black Theater. National Black Theater, I think I said the Black Arts Theater. National Black Theater. I've been to the National Black Theater events that King Simon holds there in Harlem. He had me be the host of one of the events a few years ago. This was during a special Born Day bash, which concluded this 2019 calendar year, while introducing the next one, while introducing the year 2020. Okay, Born Day in reference to birthday or Earth Day. So this celebration commemorated. It was a commemoration and rededication of the legacies of Dr. Chancellor Williams, Dr. Cheik Anta Diop, Dr. Ben, and Dr. Clarke. Right. The opening this discussion was Dr. Leonard Jeffries, one of my teachers, his wife, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, Professor James Small, Dr. Georgina Falou, and others. Dr. Leonard Jeffries said, quote, "We set aside this specific time to pay special tribute to our great African scholar warriors. There's a whole school of brothers and sisters that we need to acknowledge." He's right about that, okay? Now, prior to acquiring their academic credentials, these 4 men were prominent street scholars at various black communiversities, who then decided to reach other audiences. These men not only engaged in academia, but purposed their work for later generations of common African people to show how the history of our people came to be a tool to defend our people from the onslaught of white supremacy, explains Dr. Reggie Marbury, who's also scheduled to speak. And I've interviewed Brother Reggie Marbury as well. He took care of Dr. Ben for years. He's a really good brother, Brother Reggie Marbury. Now, each of these scholars showed in their great work that our common people are in fact the same people that history reveres. All gave up lofty positions in white academia, where those institutions would have watered down and integrated the legacy of our people and what we could achieve. So the article goes on to say these urban griots are partly responsible for the great African Renaissance, which has steadily been occurring over the past half a century and has helped resurrect black people's original mindset. They also provided their mentally liberating info as literature to reach more people and preserve it for future generations to be able to consume. And I first met Reggie Marbury and Dr. Yosef ben-Jochannan at the ASCAC conference. This is the ASCAC conference a few years ago at Howard University. That's where, because I got a chance to meet Dr. Ben also before he transitioned. Okay, now Brother Sekou, who was there as well, said, quote, they wanted to share the information about our great heritage with others so that we can learn about how great we really are. Now, Dr. Chancellor Williams, probably his most famous book would be The Destruction of Black Civilization. He also wrote Rebirth of African Civilizations. And then we know Dr. Cheik Anta Diop wrote Civilization or Barbarism. He also wrote the other one, African Origins, Myth or Reality. There's a number of books Dr. Diop wrote. You know, Dr. Ben wrote Black Man of Nile and His Family. He wrote the book dealing with the world's great African religions, dealing with Judaism, Islam, Christianity. Dr. Ben wrote a number of books. Dr. Henrik Clarke wrote Great African People in World History. He wrote Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, Slavery and the Rise of European Capitalism. Dr. Clarke wrote a number of books as well. Okay, Dr. Clarke also wrote African World Revolution. Now, Brother Reggie Marbury concludes, quote, they, through great personal suffering against all odds, forced white academia to no longer hide the fact that African history and African struggle is directly connected, and those walking in the streets of Harlem, Detroit, France, and the Caribbean have the potential to change the world, for they were once common Africans. Okay, so check out this article at AmsterdamNews.com. AmsterdamNews.com. African Scholar Warriors, Doctors Ben, Clarke, Diop, D-I-O-P is pronounced Diop, and Williams. Okay, this is from December 26, 2019. All right, look, we're coming up on a break. You listen to the African History Network show on 9:10 AM Superstation Future Radio. 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 AM the Superstation and Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, December 29, 2019. Calling number is 313-778-7600. If you have a question or comment, I want to remind you that the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History is celebrating Kwanzaa all 7 days. I've been there every day since December 26th, and I'll be back there on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. Monday, December 30th, 2019. Tuesday, December 31st. Wednesday, January 1st. It is 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. each day. It's free and open to the public. Bring the family. Kwanzaa celebrates family, community, and culture. Visit their website, theright.org, W-R-I-G-H-T, theright.org for more information. I will be there all 3 days, the rest of the week. And there's an African marketplace there, so the African American vendors, the African History Network, we have a vendor table there, so come support the African History Network. You can come meet me. Also, I have my DVD lectures there as well. All right, let me go to this other story. You know, December 20th marked the anniversary of the end of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And a lot of people think things were just all rosy. And, after that, there in Montgomery, Alabama, the Montgomery Bus Boycott lasted 381 days. Started December 5th, 1955. But a lot of people don't know what happened in the attacks on African Americans after the Montgomery Bus Boycott. We know Dr. King's house was firebombed. I think it was January 29th, 1956. Okay, and February 1st, 1956, we know that the lawsuit of Browder versus Gale was filed, and it was the lawsuit of Browder versus Gale, which went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's going to be this lawsuit that ends segregation on the buses there in Montgomery, Alabama. Okay, but the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI.org, they have a calendar each day, and I follow them on Facebook. That's Brian Stevenson's organization, and we know that they each day they post something dealing with this date in African American history, right? So December 28th, 1956, after the boycott ends, pregnant black woman shot on Montgomery bus. From December 1st, 1955 until December 20th, 1956, African American residents of Montgomery, Alabama boycotted the city bus system to protest their poor treatment on the racially segregated buses. Participants faced threats, violence, and harassment, but were ultimately victorious in December 1956 when the United States Supreme Court ruled bus segregation unconstitutional in the lawsuit of Browder versus Gale. Okay, and it was attorney Fred Gray who was one of the attorneys who filed that lawsuit, and we know he was just in Montgomery, Alabama for the unveiling of a statue dedicated to Rosa Parks. Okay, we talked about that 2 or 3 weeks ago. So after the ruling and official repeal of the city's bus segregation policies, the African American community returned to integrated buses. But African American bus riders now faced the threat of violence from white residents who resented the boycott and its results. In a terrifying development, snipers began to target the buses soon after integrated riding started. On the evening of December 28, 1956, shots were fired into a desegregated bus traveling through an African American neighborhood, and Rosa Jordan, a 22-year-old African American woman who was 8 months pregnant, was shot in both legs. Miss Jordan was transported to Oak Street General Hospital, but doctors were hesitant to remove a bullet lodged in her leg for fear that it could spark premature labor. Instead, Miss Jordan was told she would have to remain in the hospital for the duration of her pregnancy. After the bus driver and passengers were questioned at police headquarters, the bus resumed service. Less than an hour later, near the same neighborhood, the same bus was again targeted by snipers. This time, no one was hit. These shootings followed 2 earlier sniper attacks on Montgomery buses that occurred the week before, but targeted buses carrying no passengers and resulted in no injuries. On the night of Rosa Jordan's shooting, Montgomery Police Commissioner Clyde Sellers, Sellers, ordered all buses to end service for the night. The following day, 3 city commissioners met with a bus company official and decided to suspend all-night bus service after 5 p.m. until after the New Year's holiday. The curfew policy did not end until January 22nd, 1957. Okay, so that's from the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI.org. On Facebook, they post these historical pieces each day dealing with this date in African American history. When we look at the Montgomery Bus Boycott, we also know that Dr. King tried to get a concealed pistol license in Montgomery, Alabama in 1956. Because Dr. King owned guns, as did many African Americans in the Civil Rights Movement. They owned guns. Medgar Evers owned guns. Fannie Lou Hamer owned guns. Ida B. Wells, even though she's a different generation, of course, she owned guns. You know, because African Americans coming prior to the Great Migration, starting in 1915, about 90% of African Americans lived in the South, and you're coming out of a gun culture. You're growing up oftentimes on a farm. You have an agricultural basis, but you have to be able to defend your farm, defend your livestock, things like this. So you're growing up in a gun culture. So a lot of people don't know that Dr. King owned guns, and there was an article that dealt with King trying to get a concealed pistol license. I'll try to pull up that article. I think it was The Guardian. Had that article. We'll try to pull that up. Also, there was a piece from the Washington Post that I saw recently, and this piece dealt with African Americans and guns also, and it tied it to the civil rights movement, and it talked about how oftentimes when the history of the civil rights movement is discussed, the history of African Americans, defending themselves with guns, protecting themselves and protecting the civil rights workers, is not talked about. And I've talked about that before. There was I'll see if I can find this article. I've got a couple of articles on that. There's one in particular I was reading recently, so I'm going to see if I can find that one. But I encourage people to read there was a piece written by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. for the Washington Post. This is from July 28, 2014, entitled "This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed." And that's the name of his book. Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. is, he's not just a history professor, but he's a former he's a former member of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was a field secretary for SNCC for 5 years in rural Mississippi, and he was organizing African Americans, trying to register African Americans to vote, okay, in rural Mississippi. So if you know anything about Mississippi, you know Money, Mississippi, August 28th, you have 1955, you had Emmett Till killed, you know Philadelphia, Mississippi, June 21st, 1964, Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney are killed, the civil rights workers. So, this is pretty dangerous work, right, in Mississippi. And he talked about how, Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. talked about how the civil rights workers, whenever they spent the night at somebody's home, like somebody that lived there, African Americans that lived there in Mississippi, he said they always spent the night in somebody's home who owned a gun. It was just common for African Americans to own guns, just like white people down there, because you're growing up in a gun culture. You go hunting, things like this. He said, we always stayed in somebody's home. They had a gun on the nightstand. They had a gun over the fireplace, a shotgun over the fireplace, or something like that, right? So here's the article I was looking for. This is another one from the Washington Post. This is from January 31st, 2014, by Professor Nicholas Johnson, who was a guest blogger. The name of this article is "Nonviolent Winchesters and the Fine Art of Concealed Carry in the Modern Civil Rights Movement." Okay, Nonviolent Winchesters and the Fine Art of Concealed Carry in the Modern Civil Rights Movement. And Professor Nicholas Johnson is the author of a book called "Negroes and the Gun, the Black Tradition of Arms." Negroes and the Gun, the Black Tradition of Arms. And he said in this article, the longest chapter in the book, Negroes and the Gun, is devoted to the modern civil rights movement. The record here is rich with oral histories, memoirs, and other detailed first-hand accounts that illuminated the black tradition of arms. Local lore in Columbia, Tennessee says that in 1946, armed Negroes were a break on plans, B-R-A-K-E, to stop. A break on plans to lynch Thurgood Marshall. The prodigiously armed T.R.M. Howard and the surrounding black community were central in the quest for justice for Emmett Till. In 1956, Constance Baker Motley, and Constance Baker Motley goes on to become the first African American female federal judge. Constance Baker Motley and Thurgood Marshall were guarded by black armed men overnight and on the way to the courthouse when they were in Birmingham, Alabama, to press desegregation cases. Rosa Parks, the great Rosa Parks, right? We always talk about Rosa Parks is always remembered as this little gentle, quiet woman, non-violent, things like this, right? Rosa Parks recounts vividly a table filled with guns, and she and her husband Raymond Parks started hosting activist meetings at their house on Huffman Street, and Raymond Parks' gun was a comfort when harassment began. This is in Montgomery, Alabama. Legendary activist Fred Shuttlesworth, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, rode to the rescue with a 15-car caravan of armed black men when freedom riders were menaced by a crowd in Anniston. Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth's good friend Reverend Ed Gardner would later capture the dichotomy that undergirded the movement and a quip about his, quote, nonviolent Winchester, end quote. His nonviolent Winchester. So those that don't know, Winchester was a rifle, an old rifle. Usually the ones I've seen are lever action. Okay, the lever action rifle. You see them in westerns, things like this, right? Now, Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, was just a child at the time, but vividly recounts the scene of her father and the men of Dynamite Hill in Birmingham, Alabama, organizing an armed watch to deter bomb throwers, because African Americans in Birmingham, Alabama, called Birmingham Bombingham, because there were so many houses and businesses and things like this that were bombed by white segregationists in Birmingham, Alabama. Daisy Bates, who shepherded the Little Rock Nine through the integration struggle, because when you watch Eyes on the Prize, the documentary series Eyes on the Prize, we see the Little Rock Nine who desegregated Little Rock, Arkansas. I think it was 1959. Those nine, it was Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. Every morning, those students would go to Daisy Bates' house for breakfast, and she would check their homework, things like this, right? So Daisy Bates is part of civil rights history. But Daisy Bates, who shepherded the Little Rock Nine through the integration struggle, offers a rich record of the culture of arms. Correspondence with Thurgood Marshall confirms that Daisy Bates kept Old Betsy at the ready. Her memoir shows that she often carried a gun and once actually fired on a seething little man who launched a firebomb at her home. So there's a whole, Professor James Small, one of my teachers, told me personally that the civil rights movement was not a nonviolent movement. One, he was there. Two, when you study the history, if you actually study the history, if it had not been for Negroes with guns, there would not have been a civil rights movement. The way the history is told, it totally removes that aspect of the civil rights movement. That's the way, that's why largely the way the civil rights movement is told is historically inaccurate. So check out this article as well. So the article goes on to say, the people not only own guns and fired them in self-defense. These people not only own guns and fired them in self-defense. It talks about Fannie Lou Hamer. It talks about, over time, one hopes their names will rise in our culture and people will recognize the images and apprentice the steel in the eyes of women like Winston Hudson, Leola Blackman, Aura Bryant, Jackie Hicks, Fannie Lou Hamer, and the even deeper lineup of the sober, mature black men who embraced armed self-defense as a crucial private resource. Now, these weren't vigilantes. They in general weren't going out looking for trouble. They were trying to defend themselves, exercise their Second Amendment right. They were trying to defend themselves against the KKK, against the white supremacists, the bigots, the segregationists, etc., who are trying to bomb their homes, bomb their businesses, who are threatening them, who are trying to kill them. These people not only own guns and fired them in self-defense, they also carried guns in defiance of discretionary permitting schemes of the type. They also carried guns in defiance of discretionary permitting schemes of the type that said a bombing at Martin Luther King's home did not constitute good cause for granting him a permit to carry a gun. Because see, Dr. King, every Dr. King Day, we have these people have these Dr. King Day celebrations. And sometimes I go to some of them, and it sometimes it appears that, how should I say this? A lot of the people who organize these really mean well and put in a lot of time, but I'm not sure like what they've really studied about Dr. King. Okay, I'm just because Dr. King wrote 5 books. All right, I go and I'm not sure which Dr. King you're talking about. But anyway, The Guardian.com has this article. When Martin Luther King gave up his guns. King became an icon of pacifism. But he also believed in confrontational direct action. See, now, first of all, most of us are not taught that Dr. King owned guns. We just taught he changed the world through through nonviolence and turning the other cheek. Now, they don't tell you that oftentimes it was the Deacons for Defense and Justice who were armed and protecting Dr. King. And even before they were founded in 1964 by Frederick Douglass, Kirkpatrick, and Ernest Thomas, you had other groups of black men with guns. Some of them didn't have names. It's just black men with guns who were protecting Dr. King. So that part is just left out, right? We think they just did it with Bibles. And they were arming themselves as well. Few are aware, so if you look at this article from TheGuardian.com, few are aware that Martin Luther King Jr. once applied for a permit to carry a concealed handgun. In his when your kids have current events at your kid's school, right? And they bring in news articles, things like that, current events. You know, okay, I ain't gonna say that, but African American History Month, Dr. King Day celebrations at schools. I wonder if anybody gonna bring this up. I'm just curious. You know, if you want me to speak at your child's school and bring this up, I will. This is history. You trying to tell me this ain't you? You trying to tell me this is not part of civil rights history? In his 2011 book Gunfight, UCLA law professor Adam Winkler notes that after King's house was firebombed in 1956, the clergyman applied in Alabama for a concealed carry permit. Local police, loath to grant such permits to African Americans, deemed him quote-unquote unsuitable and denied his application. Now he was about 26 years old. He was a minister with a PhD. They deemed him unsuitable to have a concealed carry permit after his house was firebombed. The lesson from this incident is not, as some NRA members have tried to suggest in recent years, that King should be remembered as a gun-toting Republican. He wasn't a Republican either, by the way. ThinkProgress.org has an article dealing with Martin Luther King Jr. was not a Republican, and they break this down. But rather, the fact that King would request license to wear a gun in 1956, just as he was being catapulted onto the national stage because of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, illustrates the profundity of the transformation that he underwent over the course of his public career. Okay, we're coming up on a break. We'll continue this on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show, 9:10 a.m. the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, December 29th, 2019. This is the last show of 2019, and we're live. So shout out to everybody watching us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and watching us on 910 AM, the Superstation, Superstation's Facebook page as well. If you saw the clip from Channel 4 News, Channel 4 interviewed me. If you saw that clip, if they put that on Facebook or YouTube or something, post that for me, because I've been gone all day. I haven't seen it. All right, so right before the break, we were talking about the civil rights movement, and we were talking about the role that self-defense and guns played in the civil rights movement, because oftentimes when we talk about the civil rights movement, it's a revisionist history, and that history is totally left out of it. And as one of my teachers, Professor James Small, told me personally, if it had not been for guns, there would not have been a civil rights movement. I encourage you to read the article from the Washington Post by guest blogger Professor Nicholas Johnson, author of the book Negroes and the Gun, The Black Tradition of Arms. He wrote an article, Nonviolent Winchesters and the Fine Art of Concealed Carry in the Modern Civil Rights Movement. Once again, these brothers and sisters in general were not dumb. Okay? They were trying to protect themselves. But in Eyes on the Prize, one of the flaws of Eyes on the Prize is that this aspect of the civil rights movement is not depicted in Eyes on the Prize, which is really problematic. It gives a false sense of the history. Okay? All right, now, and then also before the break, I was talking about this article from TheGuardian.com from, I think this is from 2014, January 20th, 2014, when Martin Luther King gave up his guns. Okay, because this talks about when Dr. King tried to get a concealed pistol license in Montgomery, Alabama, after his house was firebombed during the Montgomery Bus Boycott, and it talks about he ended up giving up his guns because Bayard Rustin talked him into doing this. Okay, Bayard Rustin was pushing pacifism and nonviolence, and he found out that Dr. King owned guns, because Dr. King's house was known as an arsenal. Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. talks about this in his book, This Nonviolent Stuff That Gets You Killed: How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. And he talks about when a reporter, along with Bayard Rustin, came over to Dr. King's house one day. The reporter went to sit on the couch and almost sat on a loaded gun. And Dr. King said something to the effect of, don't worry, that's just for protection. Bayard Rustin had a long conversation with Dr. King and convinced him to get rid of his guns, because he said, well, you know, if somebody comes to your house, attacks you, something like that, and you shoot them, you could derail this whole nonviolent movement because you are using guns. All right, so that's how that goes. All right, so check out, you can read that article in its entirety. I don't have time to get through all of it. All right, I want to get to this other topic, and News1.com had an article, and I talked about this a little bit last week. Low unemployment rate contradicts the truth. No good jobs and low wages. No good jobs and low wages. Okay. This is from December 6, 2019. So we hear Donald Trump all the time bragging about the low unemployment rate. Now, he doesn't talk about the fact that he inherited a largely, in general, healthy economy from President Barack Obama. 15.1 million jobs were created under Barack Obama. We saw the unemployment rate of African Americans drop from a peak of about 16% down to 7.8% in December of 2016. He gives absolutely no credit to President Barack Obama. He just acts like he just did this all by himself. But he overbrags about the economy, because President Barack Obama knew the economy was not perfect. He knew there were still people struggling in the economy. So he didn't brag and say this is the greatest economy in the history of the universe and things like this, right? So last week I talked about this article from CBSNews.com. Almost half of all Americans work in low-wage jobs. Almost half of all Americans work in low-wage jobs. 53 million Americans work in low-wage jobs. Most of these 53 million Americans are between the ages of 25 to 54. Their median hourly wage is $10.22 an hour. So the median is a statistical measure, is the point where 50% of the population being surveyed is below that point, and 50% of the population is above that point. So 50% of that 25 to 54 segment, okay, that are working in low-wage jobs, 53 million Americans working in low-wage jobs, most are ages 25 to 54, okay, basically half of them are making less than $10.22 an hour. Now the U.S. median household income is $66,465,000 a year, all right? So if we look at this article from news1.com, low unemployment rate contradicts the truth, no good jobs and low wages. The latest job report showed a robust 266,000 workers were hired in the month of November 2019, an impressive figure that kept the country's unemployment rate at 3.2%, the lowest it's been in decades. Likewise, the African American unemployment rate was hovering around its lowest levels ever, with November 2019's 5.5% unemployment rate for African Americans inflating by just 1/10 of a percentage point from October 2019. However, camouflaged in the good news was some not so good news, economists said. Despite the latest gaudy unemployment numbers, an apparent lack of so-called good jobs has resulted in a surge of hiring to fill low-wage jobs. The Economic Policy Institute, the EPI, responded to the November 2019 jobs report with a somber reality check for those celebrating the low levels of unemployment. Quote, nominal wages rose 3.1% year over year in November, which is slower than expected, and in an economy that has had historically low unemployment, the EPI wrote. And they went on to say, it is important to remember that periods of stronger wage growth for production non-supervisory workers in this recovery tend to be followed by periods of relatively weaker growth. Definitely a promising sign if the stronger trends continue, but the slowdown for all private sector workers is still troubling, end quote. Now that, of course, did not stop Donald John Trump from tweeting about a great jobs report earlier in December. But if Donald Trump had truly been paying attention, which he does not, he might not have been so quick to claim victory. The Brookings Institute in November 2019 released its analysis of the American economy and found that even, quote, as the U.S. economy hums along at a favorable pace, there is a vast segment of workers today earning wages low enough to leave their livelihood and families extremely vulnerable. There is a vast segment of workers today earning wages low enough to leave their livelihood and families extremely vulnerable, end quote. Now, the Brookings Institute went on to write that, quote, 53 million Americans between the ages of 18 to 64, accounting for 44% of all workers, qualify as low wage. Now, why doesn't Donald Trump talk about this, who talked about being a great businessman, and he would bring all the jobs back, and he would bring manufacturing back, and he would bring coal back, and he was going to have clean coal and all this stuff? Why doesn't he talk about this? 53 million Americans between the ages of 18 to 64, accounting for 44% of all workers, qualify as low wage. Their median hourly wages are $10.22 an hour, and median annual earnings are about $18,000 a year, which means 50% of this population is making below $18,000 a year. So to give some perspective to this, to put this in perspective, 30% of low-wage workers, or 16 million people, live in families earning below 150% of the poverty line. 30% of low-wage workers, or 16 million people, live in families earning below 150% of the poverty line. These workers get by on very low incomes, about $30,000 for a family of 3 and $36,000 for a family of 4. So with numbers like this, Donald John Trump also wants to kick about 700,000 people off of SNAP, off of food stamps. Now, Professor William E. Spriggs, who is the chief economist for the AFL-CIO union, and he's also a professor of economics at Howard University, tweeted how exactly low-wage jobs adversely affect African Americans and African American women in particular. It was important to remember that while African American unemployment was among its lowest levels ever, at 5.5%, I guess if you don't include slavery, when there was basically full employment but no pay, it was still head and shoulder over the jobless rates for both white people at 3.2% and the national average of 3.5%. Yeah, 3.2% was the unemployment rate for white Americans, 3.5% was the unemployment rate overall. Aside from low wages, another concern was the economy's longer-term health and the risk of a recession, which would disproportionately affect African American workers in particular. Notwithstanding Trump's looming impeachment, along with the employment repercussions from his trade war with China and series of misguided tariffs, has helped the racial wage gap continue to widen. Okay, so check out this article from newsone.com. Low unemployment rate contradicts the truth. No good jobs and low wages. December 6, 2019 by Bruce C.T. Wright at newsone.com. And also look at the piece from CBSnews.com. Almost half of all Americans work in low-wage jobs. Okay, it's a really, really good article from CBSnews.com, which contradicts a lot of the rosy messages that Trump wants to give. He sounds really detached from reality, actually, if you actually study the numbers. About 6 out of 10 workers are saying that their jobs are mediocre to downright bad, according to a recent Gallup job quality survey. For instance, 1 in 5 workers told Gallup their benefits are worse now than they were 5 years ago. Low-wage jobs represent between 1/3 to 2/3 of all jobs in the country's almost 400 metropolitan areas, the Brookings study found. Low-wage jobs represent between 1/3 to 2/3 of all of the jobs in the country's almost 400 metropolitan areas. Let's see. Okay, so check out the rest of this article as well. All right, now, let's go to this clip here. I want to share with you a clip of my presentation from the Kwanzaa presentation I did on Friday, December 27th at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. Okay, let's see. Okay, it's playing. Is it playing? Yeah. So I'm going to show this clip of Malcolm, and this helps to set the tone for the conversation this evening. Because this is Malcolm asking the question of who are you? And we understand that Kwanzaa and the 7 principles of Kwanzaa helps reconnect African people to African culture and African history, okay? All right, so let's take a look at this. Okay, turn up the volume, Lee, turn up the volume. Let's start it again. Turn it up, son. Okay, I'm going to start it from the beginning. Okay.
Who are you? You don't know. Don't tell me Negro. That's not it. What were you before the white man named you a Negro? And where were you? And what did you have? What was yours? What language did you speak then? What was your name? It couldn't have been Smith or Jones or Bunch or Power. That wasn't your name. They don't have those kind of names where you and I came from. No, what was your name? And why don't you now know what your name was then? Where did it go? Where did you lose it? Who took it? And how did he take it? What tongue did you speak? How did the man take your tongue? Where's your history? How did the man wipe out your history? How did the man, what did the man do to make you as dumb as you are right now?
African Americans. African Americans.
Did he say that?
African Americans.
Why?
Or so-called Negro. One of the reasons that it is bad for us to continue to just refer to ourselves as so-called Negro, that's negative. When we say so-called Negro, that's pointing out what we aren't, but it isn't telling us what we are. We are African, and we happen to be in America. We're not American. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us. We were brought here against our will. We were not brought here to be made citizens. We were not brought here to enjoy the constitutional gifts that they speak so beautifully about today. Because we weren't brought here to be made citizens today, now that we've become awakened to some degree and we begin to ask for those things which they say are supposedly for Americans, they look upon us with hostility and unfriendliness. So our unwanted presence, the fact that we are unwanted, is becoming magnified in all of America's preachments today.
All right, so give it up for Malcolm X. All right. That second clip, I don't even know who put that in there. That just popped up in there. I guess it was the ancestors. So the reason why I put that in there, for a few reasons. One is I keep hearing people who think that Reverend Jesse Jackson invented the term African American. I'm like, where'd y'all get that from? That's not true. The earliest recorded usage of the term African American goes back to May 15, 1782 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. How many people know this? See, they can't run that on me because when they post that stuff, I have to shut them down. This is Malcolm. I believe that was 64. It's probably from the Battle of the Bullet because I have the actual transcript of that speech. And he delivered the Battle of the Bullet twice. April 3rd, 1964 in Cleveland, Ohio. April 4th, 1964. What was it? April 4th, 1964. In Detroit. Now everybody should have said that. Hold on, that was in Detroit. April 4th, 1964. Okay? So Reverend Jesse Jackson and the group, hold on. Reverend Jesse Jackson and a group of African American scholars reintroduced the term African American. They didn't create it. Okay? Also, the term Afro-American goes back to the 1830s. We had the Afro-American newspaper in Baltimore, which is still there. That was founded about 1882. We had the we had the National Afro-American League, founded about 1892. We had the Afro-American Council, founded in 1898 by Bishop Alexander Walters and T. Thomas Fortune. That was the precursor. Out of the Afro-American Council, you're going to have the Niagara movement come out of the Afro-American Council in 1905.
Okay, so that was an excerpt of my presentation, and my camera was in the AV room, and it was near a fan that was blowing to keep the equipment cool. So you hear a little distortion there. Yeah, but that's Malcolm X in '64 using the term Afro-American, because as Professor James Small told me personally, he said, actually when I interviewed Professor James Small August 20th, 2019, for the 400th year anniversary of August 20th, 1619, when they told us we first came here to this land, but we had been here for tens of thousands of years, and even the Spanish were bringing Africans into the territory that we today call South Carolina in 1526, which was 93 years before 1619. So the evidence is there. And during when the 1619 project came out, there were other articles written talking about 1526. So if we look at WashingtonPost.com, Let's see here. Which one are we looking at? Washington Post. Well, SmithsonianMag.com, which is the official website of the Smithsonian Institute. The misguided focus on 1619 as the beginning of slavery in the U.S. damages our understanding of American history. The misguided focus on 1619 as the beginning of slavery in the U.S. damages our understanding of American history. The year the first enslaved Africans were brought to Jamestown is drilled, it was actually Hampton, Virginia, is drilled into students' memories, but overemphasizing this date distorts history, which is true because the Spanish were taking Africans into the territory we call South Carolina in 1526, and then there's a good article from Washington Post. I talked about this today when I spoke at St. Francis Missionary Baptist Church. And if you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, or call me 313-462-0003, 313-462-0003. So even if it's for Kwanzaa, we can make it happen. Dr. King Day, we could definitely make it happen. Now, when I speak on Dr. King, when I do my Dr. King Day presentations, I don't do these okey-doke Negro presentations to Dr. King Day. I did with the revolutionary Dr. King. Okay, so I come at it totally differently, and I can document what I'm talking about. I don't deal with a lot of what we've been taught about Dr. King is either distorted to water down his potency, or is wrong. Okay. So when I do my Dr. King Day presentations, I do a presentation, The Distortion of the Legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the revolutionary, will not be televised on the television. Okay, so, but Washington Post has an article from September 7th, 2019. Before 1619, there was 1526. The mystery of the first enslaved Africans in what became the United States. Spanish explorers brought 100 slaves to a doomed settlement in South Carolina or Georgia. Within weeks, the subjugated revolted, then vanished. This is 93 years prior to that. Okay. Now, I want to go to this clip here. This is Muhammad Ali and Dr. King. This is March 30th, 1967. And Dr. King and Muhammad Ali had a secret friendship. Okay, a lot of people don't know about this. Let's go to this clip here.
Nothing, just friends, just like Khrushchev and Kennedy and everybody. When all of the politicians of all other white races come together, and although they believe different, they think different, whites can come together and discuss the common cause. But whenever a few of us come together, the world is shook up. And I say, whatever went back there is our business.
Reverend King, do you agree? Oh, yes. We had a very good discussion on many matters. And, of course, these are not things that we would discuss here. But we do have common problems and common concerns. And above all, as Muhammad Ali has just said, we are all victims of the same system of oppression. And even though we may have different religious beliefs, this does not at all bring about a difference in terms of our concerns.
Still brothers.
Do you share the same, just one more question, do you share the same concern that Muhammad has for his draft status?
Oh, I certainly do. My views on the draft are very clear. I'm against it. And I think the sooner our country does away with the draft, the better it will be for everybody. I'm very disturbed about the militaristic posture of our nation. And I think until we have a radical reordering of priorities in our country, we are going more and more to the depths, and I should say, to the doom that follows arrogance of power, as Senator Fulbright said.
Okay, so that is from March 30th, 1967. That is courtesy Associated Press. That is Muhammad Ali and Dr. King. They were being interviewed after having a private meeting. There was a secret friendship that they had. A lot of people don't know about this. Biography.com has an article dealing with the secret friendship between Muhammad Ali and Dr. King, okay? And at this time, basically, so this is 2 years after Malcolm was assassinated. Malcolm was assassinated February 21st, 1965 at the Audubon Ballroom. This was March 30th, 1967. And these were basically the two most recognizable African-American men, okay, basically in the world. And the next month is going to be a pivotal month in the anti-Vietnam movement. So April 4th, 1967, Dr. King delivers his first speech in opposition to the Vietnam War entitled Beyond Vietnam. And overnight, he becomes the most hated man in America. Exactly 1 year to the date later, he is assassinated, April 4th, 1968. And then April 30th, 1967, the end of that month, Muhammad Ali refuses to be drafted into the Army. He arrives at the draft board. They announce his name. He refuses to take the step forward, okay, in defiance, and refuses to be drafted. This is going to lead to a U.S. Supreme Court case, and he is going to be found guilty. He appeals. He's out of the ring for basically 3.5 years. He's stripped of his boxing license. On the appeal, he's going to win because he claims the status of a conscientious objector because of his Islamic faith. All right, so but Muhammad Ali says there that, you know, there was a point in that clip that you heard that even though they had disagreements, one's a Baptist, one's a Muslim, etc., Muhammad Ali said, we're still brothers. He said, we're still brothers. And what a lot of people don't know, I've talked about this before, is that July 31st, 1963, the month before the March on Washington, Malcolm sends a letter to the leading civil rights leaders, including Dr. King, requesting a meeting with Dr. King. And Malcolm says we have to find a common solution to a common problem posed by a common enemy. A common solution to a common problem posed by a common enemy. Malcolm was calling for a unification of the civil rights leaders, okay? And a lot of people don't know this, all right? Now, if we look at, and so March 26, 1964, later in the same month that Malcolm separates from the Nation of Islam, that's when he meets Dr. King. So all the photographs that we see of Dr. King and Malcolm together, that's from March 26, 1964. That's the U.S. Senate debate for the Civil Rights Act, okay? The following month, so earlier that same month, March 8, 1964, Malcolm officially separates from the Nation of Islam, right? Later, the following month, April of 64, April 3rd and April 4th of 64, Malcolm delivers his speech, The Ballad of the Bullet. He delivers this speech about a week or so after he meets Dr. King. When Malcolm meets Dr. King, March 26, 1964, Malcolm tells Dr. King, I'm throwing all of my effort into the heart of the civil rights movement. There's an article from the Washington Post written by, I think this one was written by Deneen L. Brown, and it's entitled Martin Luther King Jr. Met Malcolm X Just Once, okay, and the photo still haunts us. And it talks about what happened at the meeting, and it talks about Malcolm sending a letter to Dr. King and the other leading civil rights leaders requesting a meeting for them. And Malcolm was calling for a unification of the civil rights leaders. This is still when Malcolm was still in the Nation of Islam. So later in April of 64, Malcolm leaves for his Hajj to Mecca. And he goes on a tour of 14 African nations as well. Okay? And watch the documentary Make It Plain. That's one of the best documentaries dealing with Malcolm. Okay? But this article, Martin Luther King Jr. Met Malcolm X Just Once, the photo still haunts us with what was lost. It talks about interactions between Malcolm and Dr. King, okay, through letters, things like this, right? And Dr. King sending a telegram to Betty Shabazz when Malcolm is assassinated. But in Dr. King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? Okay, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, came out in 1967. on page 133 of this book, Dr. King talks about the Nation of Islam. All right. Now, keep in mind that February 24th, 1966, okay, almost to the date of 1 year after Malcolm is assassinated, February 24th, 1966, Dr. King and Coretta Scott King go to the house of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And Dr. King meets with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So people may ask the question, well, Dr. King, you're supposed to be a good black Baptist preacher. What you doing with Muhammad Ali? We put you on the cover of Time magazine, gave you the Nobel Peace Prize. What are you doing with this Negro? Okay, this black Muslim. And then what are you doing over here meeting with this black Muslim, Elijah Muhammad? Right? So let's look at page 133 for the sake of time here, because we only have a few minutes left. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Dr. King said, while I strongly disagree with their separatist black supremacy philosophy, I have nothing but admiration for what our Muslim brothers have done to rehabilitate ex-convicts, dope addicts, and men and women who, through despair and self-hatred, have sunk to moral degeneracy. This must be attempted on a much larger scale and without the negative overtones that accompany black Muslimism. Okay, so he's talking about then at the time. But even for now, most people don't know that Dr. King was praising the Nation of Islam. This is what Dr. King wrote. This is his book. This is what Dr. King wrote. Okay, so this was revolutionary back then and today. Dr. King talks about group unity, things like this. He talks about how there are still too many Negro churches that are so absorbed in a future good over yonder that they condition their members to adjust to the present evils over here. Too many Negro newspapers have veered away from their traditional role as protest organs, agitating for social change, and have turned to the sensational and the conservative in place of the substantive and the militant. So this is in 67 that Dr. King is saying this. He goes on to say, through group unity, we must convey to one another that our women must be respected, and that life is too precious to be destroyed in a Saturday night brawl or a gang execution. Through community agency, we must develop a positive program and become adjusted to urban living and improve their general level of behavior. Then he goes in to talk about the Nation of Islam. That's page 132 and 133 of Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. Very quickly, read the article from TheRoot.com, Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., who was the first African American, because 1513, going back to 1619 and 1526, 1513, Juan Garrido, who was born in West Africa in 1480, he was of African descent. Juan Garrido comes into Florida in 1513 with the Spanish conquistador Juan Ponce de Leon. That's before 1526. That's 13 years before 1526. Okay? All right, so we'll see you all at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History for the next few days of Kwanzaa. Visit theright.org, WRIGHT, theright.org for more information. We know the last 3 days of Kwanzaa, the 30th through January 1st, is 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., free and open to the family. Be sure to visit the vendor table of the African History Network. Come see me. I'll have my DVD lectures there as well. You can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And all of my DVD lectures are at our website. We have the Black Migration 1619 to 2019 bundle packs, and we have a lot of information there for you as well. Follow us on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, Michael Imhotep on YouTube, and on Facebook, the African History Network. African History Network. All right, stay tuned for Pastor Mo. Remember that the African History Network focuses on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. Happy Kwanzaa. Happy New Year. And we'll talk to you in 2020. Peace.